friends, it's Steven with Leviathan Snakes, and for this week's video, we are going to be talking about 7 different mistakes that can stifle your growth as a ball python breeder. So again, for like most of our videos, this is focused on those who want to breed ball pythons, breed reptiles, with the goal of turning it into a full-time business. So we hope you guys enjoy the video. If you do, please like, comment, subscribe, but let's jump in it. The very first mistake that we want to talk about is having a weak or not having a ball python business strategy at all. And I say business strategy, not simply a breeding strategy. It's really, really important to know what animals are you going to hold back each season and what are your ultimate goals. But when it comes to running it as a business, you need to know not only what are the animals you're creating, who is going to want those animals and who is best served with those animals. Then, how are you appealing to that market? How are you putting yourself out in front of that market so that way, when you do have those animals to sell, they know where to find you and they trust you and they're willing to buy from you. And if you don't have an idea of how you're going to do this, what will end up happening is you will produce to those animals, and they might be incredible animals and you might be able to sell them, but you'll probably be in for a lot of pain, at least initially, while you figure out how exactly are you going to sell those and how exactly are you going to make your business sustainable. So I think going into it, if you don't have a business strategy or if you have a weak business strategy, this is one of the #1 reasons what stifles growth for ball python breeders. Mistake number 2 is risk aversion, and I think that it is very common for new breeders when they get into the hobby to be scared of investing large amounts of money, kind of rightfully so, because breeding ball pythons is a risky business to begin with. You have to risk the odds. You might pair a double het to double het that you've been growing up for years together and miss on every single one of the babies, and you just get essentially a clutch of animals that have no significant value, and this can set you behind years and years and years, especially as the rest of the hobby progresses without you. Now, that said, I think that the risk aversion comes in as a mistake when people are getting into the ball python hobby and they are wanting to turn it into a full-time business, but they are unwilling or unable to invest the amount of money that is really required to turn it into a full-time business. So when it comes to breeding animals, we've talked about this in multiple different videos, in your home or in like extra bedroom, something like that. Space is a huge consideration that I think most new breeders don't even think about until they have maybe their first or second season and they have a bunch of babies. And at that point, they realize that they are limited based on the amount of space that they can physically put racks and enclosures in, as well as the time that it takes to the time that is required to care for the animals. And because of this, what ends up happening, really, really common, is that the initial animals that they very first bought that were really good deals, they are not producing the animals that are selling quickly, and they're not producing animals that are super, super high value. So because of this, they're essentially taking up space that could have been used by a more efficient animal for their business. And at this kind of point, often what happens is ball python breeders will retool. They will sell off the animals that don't really work for their projects anymore, and they will try to reinvest the money into higher end animals. I say all of this because the risk aversion aspect of this is stifling their growth. If the breeder were to invest into the higher end animals that they ultimately wanted to buy earlier on, that means that those higher end animals are bigger, they're older, they might be producing clutches for them. Instead, what's happening is that the newer breeders are investing in lower end animals that they end up wanting to sell after a season or two, and then they're buying the high end animals and taking a couple seasons to grow up before they start producing. So in this situation, the risk aversion aspect of it, though it might be a little bit safer in case somebody were to get out to begin with, is stifling their long-term growth. Mistake number 3 is weak reinvestment. So weak reinvestment can stifle your growth because even though you can invest thousands and thousands of dollars, you can invest $100,000 today in various different high-end animals. 5 years from now, those animals might be awesome, but they're not going to be the same value as what they are today because there's more supply available for them. Now, with this, if you want to maintain that same level of income that you are trying to generate, it is going to be necessary for you to either hold back the best animals from the clutches, so that way you can keep pushing your projects forward, or for you to buy animals that are beyond what you could have made anyway. And I think that both of these approaches are actually really, really important, because when I'm talking about reinvestment, it's not simply just going out and buying new stuff, though that is part of it. It is also making sure that you are holding back the animals that are going to keep progressing you forward, because if you sell your best stuff, what will end up happening is once you've sold everything that season, maybe you made a lot of money that first year, but the next year you're in a worse spot because the animals that you still have, they're not as rare as they used to be. So they're not worth as much, and you're going to be essentially repeating your pairings for the second year in a row because you didn't hold anything back. So this is a mistake, or something like that, that I think really, really stifles growth, and that is when people are selling too much too quickly, or when they are not reinvesting and buying the animals that are really going to keep pushing them forward, and ultimately they fall behind. The fourth mistake that I want to talk about when it comes to people having slow or stifled or just no growth when it comes to their ball python breeding business is general ignorance of the industry, of business, of marketing, and all of these different skills that are outside of simply breeding the animals. And we've talked about this in other videos. Most people who decide to do a ball python breeding business love the animals, and they have a lot of knowledge, and that they are often very much experts or on their way to be experts on the specific animals themselves. But it isn't as common for somebody to come in and have all of the skills needed and necessary to run a successful business, not just a ball python business, but any business. So somebody who is ignorant of how taxes work and how you can leverage the investments that you make for your business into a legal, 100% legal way to write off and reduce your tax burden, they're not going to have as much capital available to them than somebody who does understand all of this stuff and is able to optimize their purchases so that way they are paying themselves rather than paying the government when it comes to tax time. Beyond taxes, though that is a huge aspect of running any business, I think that it is very, very common for people to start a ball python breeding business and maybe not really like social media, not like the idea of marketing, not like the idea of being on camera, and because of this, they just don't do it. And then when it comes time to sell their animals, they are being outsold and they are losing to potential competition who are better at marketing their animals, who are better at selling their animals, and are more personable. So again, it doesn't mean that they won't be able to sell anything, but because they are kind of the second pick, if that makes sense, versus somebody who is very charismatic and makes a connection with a lot of different people, it is going to make it harder for that person who doesn't like marketing, who doesn't like sales, who doesn't like social media to keep ahead because they're just not getting as many sales as other people in the hobby are. When it comes to the breeding side of things, being ignorant of current events in the breeding hobby can really, really set you back and stifle your long-term growth. So let's say that you decided that you wanted to breed ball pythons and you weren't going to be on social media at all, and you didn't really care about the community because all you cared about were the animals. What could potentially happen is as innovations came out in the hobby, like the genetic testing that came out within this last year or so, you might not hear about that information until years after it has gotten to the point where somebody in person tells you about it. And it might not ever happen, and you might just go off thinking that, oh, that's not really something that you can do, and then you lose out on potential avenues, potential strategies that could have really, really helped you out. And this is actually a perfect time to talk about our, at Leviathan Stakes, very first sponsor that we've ever had, and that is Rare Genetics Incorporated. So Rare Genetics Incorporated are the people who do the genetic testing with Morph Market and with Clutch, and they are absolutely amazing. So we have had several of our animals tested for various different genes, and while we have had positive news, I do want to say that getting negative news, like saying that an animal isn't het or doesn't carry a gene that you wanted it to carry, is actually super, super helpful, because for us, we have an animal that we weren't sure if she had yellow belly or not. It was a leopard yellow belly sunset, or possible yellow belly sunset. So we had sent in her shed to get tested to see if she for sure had yellow belly, because if she did have yellow belly, we didn't want to pair her to a yellow belly animal because we didn't want to risk getting ivories and not being able to tell about sunset, even though you can test for sunset now thanks to RGI. But going off of that, it ended up coming back that she did not have yellow belly, so that changed our breeding plans, and it lets us take a red stripe yellow belly het sunset to her right now, and we're already pairing them. They've already locked up. We are super freaking excited about this clutch, and it wouldn't have been possible without genetic testing from RGI. If you guys are looking to get something tested, definitely check them out. We highly recommend them. The last little thing that I want to say on the ignorance topic is that it is perfectly fine to not know how to do any of these things, but I think that if you want to run a successful ball python reptile business, or any business in general, you have to be willing to try to learn how to get it. And that doesn't mean you have to be an expert. That doesn't mean that you have to be the best professional level person at your marketing, at sales, as an accountant, all of these different things. But if you're willing to learn and put in the effort needed to figure out how you can do this, or how you can hire somebody to do this for you, you'll be in a far better position than somebody who's just like, I don't know how to do any of that, I'm not gonna worry about it. Mistake number 5 is overextension. So earlier we talked about like being risk averse. I think that overextension is much more dangerous and much more likely to just make somebody get out of the ball python hobby than being risk averse. If you're being risk averse, you're just taking it really slow and you're doing it within your means, which is honestly a pretty good approach because the ball python breeding hobby is 100% a marathon and not a sprint. So the reason why overextension can be so dangerous and can stifle, honestly, just destroy long-term growth, is because if you're going into debt and you are spending money that you do not have and you are being burdened with those monthly payments that maybe you can afford, maybe you can't afford, it's putting you in a vulnerable position, because if some emergency were to come up in your life and you don't have any way to handle it, you may be forced to have to sell animals or racks or things like that that you are growing up in order to try to grow your business. And then each time you're doing that, you're completely resetting the clock because you're going to need to buy hatchlings or maybe some adult breeders, but most of the time, adult breeders aren't as powerful as the hatchlings that are available at the exact same time that both of the animals are up on Morph Market or something like that. So overextending yourself, in my opinion, might be able to jump you ahead really quick, but when it comes to the amount of time needed to breed animals, overall it's a super risky play, and ultimately I think it can stifle your growth. Mistake number 6 that I want to talk about is spreading yourself too thin. So we've talked about it in the past that I personally think that it is a better strategy to specialize in 1, 2, or 3 morphs as you are getting into ball pythons. And that doesn't mean that you only have 1, 2, or 3 genes, but that you have a focus on 1, 2, or 3 different projects, and that's what you kind of try to get known for, because it's way easier to dive deep on 3 projects than it is to dive deep on 10 projects. So when it comes to this, when it comes to spreading yourself too thin, I think that if you try getting a little bit of everything in the ball python hobby, you will end up chasing projects and not making significant progress on any of them. Each time you see a new combo come out, it's very likely that you'll want to get a little bit of that too, and then you will end up having a collection of animals that don't really work together. And beyond just the morphs, I think that it is also a danger that people will diversify into different species, and if you are spreading yourself too thin, if you decide that you're going to breed ball pythons and you're going to breed boas and you're going to breed carpet pythons and maybe you're going to try some red-eyed crocodile skinks and maybe some poison dart frogs, overall it can be very hard to manage the husbandry of all of those different animals, and that 1, 2, or maybe even 3 of them might suffer because you're so used to caring for one specific type and you're not used to caring for this other type of animals. Beyond all of that, it also requires lots of different types of enclosures. It requires a lot of different investment, as you can't necessarily cross over a poison dart frog with your ball python projects. So any investment you make in your poison dart frogs is an investment you're not making in your ball python projects. So this is one reason why I think that spreading yourself too thin can stifle your long-term growth. The last mistake that we want to talk about is laziness. When it comes to breeding ball pythons, it is pretty common that people will want to turn their ball python income into their full-time income at some point because they don't like their job. Maybe they think that it's going to be easier if they can set their own schedule, take care of their animals, vend shows, and all of those different things required to run their business. But I think that especially early on, people do not realize how much work is required to run a ball python or reptile business at all. And I think that the laziness comes in when people are not willing to put in all of the work that is required. And all of the work isn't necessarily changing waters and cleaning up poop, though that is a part of the work and that does take a lot of time. All of that work might be raising your own rodents. All of that work might be grinding on social media so that way you can build a big enough audience so that way when you have animals to sell, there are people who want to buy from you. And if you're not willing to put in all of this different work, maybe because you're busy or maybe you just rather play video games or something like this, it is going to stifle your long-term potential, and somebody who is willing to put in all of the work that is required is far more likely to succeed and beat you when it comes to the competition of breeding ball pythons. So this was not an all-inclusive list, and I am sure that there are things that we missed. If you guys think of another mistake that really can stifle the long-term growth of a ball python breeder, definitely leave it in the comments below. Anyways, we hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you do, please like, comment, subscribe, and we will see you next week.